Good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the government's air quality plan. My name is Christopher Snelling. I'm the head of national and regional policy here at the FTA, and I'm joined by my colleague Becky Terry.
Hello, I'm the environment policy manager for FTA.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. So to get straight to it, as you'll be aware, last week the government finally issued their air quality plan for the UK. The purpose of this afternoon's webinar, which we'd expect to last around half an hour, is just to give you our first take on the implications of this. It moves us forward a few steps in understanding of what is likely to happen to commercial vehicle restrictions in the UK over the next 3 to 4 years. So we wanted to communicate our latest understanding of where this moves us to, but also indeed what we're still missing and when we expect to get more information that will be of use. So to break it down somewhat, from the media coverage you'll have seen last week took quite a different tone to some of the previous coverage. Apologies, I've missed some housekeeping. We do have an option, everyone's on mute, but you do have an option to write in a question. Please feel free to write in at any point if something is not clear, if there's something you need more information on. We'll assess those questions and we'll answer as appropriate, either as we go at the end, or indeed we can come back to you privately if that makes more sense. So please feel free to make use of the question button, which should be on your top right-hand side. So yes, as you'll have seen, quite a lot of the media attention focused around the 2040 announcement about banning the sale of diesel and petrol vehicles at that point, which from my point of view shows that whilst not too much has changed in the government's plan, their PR has got somewhat better in that distracted the media from the real story in it, which is what's actually going to happen in Britain's cities between now and 2020. However, we shouldn't let that distract us from the fact that this is still happening. All of the restrictions that we've been talking about, the direction of travel, is still in place to happen. So we will still see restrictions, which will be in the form of charges for non-compliant vehicles in an awful lot of UK cities over the next 2 to 3 year period. There were also some further measures that were either announced or confirmed, and there are some other consultations now underway already on some measures to go alongside the central element that we're interested in, which is the clean air zone. So, moving us on to just recap what has been reiterated, what we think we already knew. For those seeking confirmation, we are still looking at a Euro 6 standard for diesel vehicles, Euro 4 for petrol. It will still take the form, in England at least, of a charge for the non-compliant vehicles, so you can pay the fee and it's perfectly okay to go in. It's not a contravention, these aren't fines. We still believe the charges would be in the range indicated, much smaller for vans, but prohibitively high for HGVs. One detail from the scheme, which we think is a change from certainly how the London low emission zone has worked till now, is that the government has announced that these are supposed to be temporary schemes. They are only supposed to be used until they are no longer needed for the legal compliance with air quality targets. So as soon as natural fleet turnover across the UK has reached a certain point, they won't be needed anymore and would be rescinded. How much use that will be to anyone, I'm not sure, as by that point you will have all had to upgrade vehicles anyway. But for anyone who is looking at paying the charge to get through it, it may only be a temporary period, though it's impossible to note at this stage how many years that would be, but it should be a relatively short number. So, the detail again about the scheme, this element continues as before. Of the chargeable clean air zones where you'd have to pay a fee to take your vehicle in, if it's not Euro 6 in the case of diesel, they have divided that into 4 categories, essentially a kind of pyramid system with purely effectively bus and taxi only at the top, and then broadening out to include HGVs, then adding to that vans and minibuses, and then your final category D, which incorporates all vehicles. previously announced only London scheme has been a Category D scheme involving all vehicles. Other schemes have been, there are also some low emission zones in existence around the UK already at the A grade in places such as Norwich, Oxford and Brighton. But we're expecting the real change here will be in the schemes at the B and C level. So what was particularly else, how have we moved on in this latest policy? They set out in the document a long list, 29 different English councils that are required now have been directed by the Secretary of State to take action in order to deal with the illegal levels of pollution in their area. Now, obviously, this is quite a long list, and don't worry, we're going to break this down as much as possible to give you some insight into what this will actually mean on the ground. The first thing to draw out from this list is that there are two phases to it. Phase one is the cities that had already been mandated to introduce a clean air zone. So we have Birmingham, Leeds, Nottingham, Derby and Southampton, as well as London, which is not usually referenced by DEFRA because it's doing it anyway, but it is effectively part of this same first tranche. So the key difference with the other schemes is that these will happen earlier. So these will need to be in place by the end of 2019 in these 6 locations. But as we state there, both London and Southampton have already announced that theirs will start on April in 2019. We may well expect others to follow that same intention, but it is possible they could be later in the year. A change from the previous plan is that previously, aside from London, only whilst Birmingham, all of them would have included HGVs, only Birmingham and Leeds were due to include vans. However, our understanding now is that based on the changes to the modelling, all of the named cities on this page will be covering HGVs and vans right from day one. So, as we are constantly aware, this is an especial problem for those reliant on vans, as there will be far fewer compliant vans available. By April 2019, it will still only be about 2.5 years worth of the fleet will be compliant Euro 6 vehicles, so it will affect an awful lot of van operators. We're looking at just over 5 years worth of compliant HGVs, so there will be more in the fleet, however still a very significant problem for anyone with specialist vehicles or anyone who relies on the second-hand market. In terms of the exact geography of these, we're still looking at confirmation. We have a lot of detail from London and Southampton. However, the geography of the other cities is less clear. But in general, we would still be expecting a city-wide approach, as that seems to be broadly what's being adopted. So that's phase one. Phase two is where we start to get a little more change in detail. So they've named 23 other local authorities that need to take action. There's the timescale for these is as set out, that they now have only a short number of months to produce a feasibility study. Those feasibility studies will set out what the preferred or intended option is. So we should have our first, and that should be made public, so we should have our first indication of what systems will be taken by the cities at around that time. Just picking up there on a question, and yes, the slides will be made available. We'll be sending those around to all attendees, so you don't need to worry about that. We will send this on. And then the first legislated date is at the end of March next year, where we should get the first, and those details will be public. So we will see the first indication that they will definitely do a clean air zone, and that and what form it might take. And then they will have to have a final plan in place by the very end of the year. So that should, again, is another marker point to look out for. But obviously that list of 23 local authorities is not much use to us. It's very government speak in terms of the regulatory mechanisms and how they regulate on these things. So we've done some work on breaking that down. The first part of that is to look at those local councils as actual areas. And by doing that, we can break it down to actually, in addition to the 6 cities in phase 1, the cities, and here with this second phase, we're expecting them to introduce their clean air zones by the end of 2020. We can actually break it down to these 12 areas where further action is required. However, we're also able to go a stage further than that, as based on some of our discussions that we've initially had with government about exactly what the numbers behind this mean, we are able to get some more analysis of that. This is pretty much what you can get from the government papers as published. This is our, next slide is our understanding. Now, I'd stress that it's not certainty at all, but our understanding of where it is expected that these zones will need to go. So we can see there that Sheffield and Middlesbrough are expected to be in what is for us the highest category, so regulating both HGVs and vans, and then the 5 areas in the orange zone to be purely HGVs. And for the green options, there's a variety of reasons why, whether it's that another bypass is going to be built during the time frame, or that they are very close to another clean air zone area. So for example, with Rotherham, it's expected that actually if Sheffield implements an HGV and van clean air zone, then Rotherham's problem will disappear. Similarly with the New Forest and Southampton from phase 1, that should also be dealt with. So whilst there are these further locations there in green that have to take action, in reality the action may not be as much as a chargeable clean air zone, because their air quality problem may be taken care of. So aside from the initial 6, we then have these 2 further zones that are HGV and van, so that makes 8 locations in that category, and then we have these further 5 in orange. But moving on from that, we've been talking throughout this. DEFRA's plan is a slightly complicated one in that DEFRA is the UK responding authority. However, it really only has remit in England, so it is coordinating and organising what's happening in the rest of the UK. So what is happening elsewhere? Well, Scotland is pushing ahead, as noted in the publications, is pushing ahead quite aggressively with the concept of low emission zones. It's worth noting for Scotland that where they do introduce requirements, it will be a ban and not a charge, so you will not be allowed to take pre-Euro 6 vehicles in if they apply to commercial vehicles. And again, they're being very aggressive on start times. They are looking at starting one just over a year from now. And we in fact should see the detailed proposals on that later this month. However, our understanding is that in the first phase at least, commercial vehicles won't be involved. We're expecting a bus-only LEZ in somewhere like Glasgow in the first iteration. It is quite possible that commercial vehicles will be involved later, but we will, that time frame should be at least a few years further off. We may get more detail on that when the Scottish National Low Emission Framework is issued for consultation before the end of the year. Looking at Wales, it is anticipated in the DEFRA paper that there will be a need for a clean air zone in Cardiff. The Welsh government information on this is that it is looking at a start date of 2021. Exactly what kinds of vehicles that would involve is unclear, and indeed whether 2021 is an acceptable time frame, legally speaking. However, there is active talk of the need that Cardiff would have to have a clean air zone on that time frame. There will be, within the next year, a new clean air zone framework for Wales, so things will be a bit further delayed in the Principality. And then for Northern Ireland, there's a further indication that they have issues there. They are looking at revising their air quality policy and coming up with an action plan. Again, the speculation, unsurprisingly, there is around Belfast. That city is one of the remaining transgressors, so there may be need for a clean air zone there. The previous executive in Northern Ireland was not very well minded towards clean air zones. Obviously, currently there's the constitutional situation in Northern Ireland, which means we may or may not have an executive. So it may end up being the Northern Ireland office that makes that decision, which doesn't add to the clarity anymore. So that could be quite unclear for some time, but we will continue pushing on that. That's the detail on the clean air zones and the chargeable bit, which is the central regulatory issue that we're concerned about. But there are other elements in the plan. I just hand over at this point to my colleague Becky to talk us through those.
Okay. So the first one is a scrappage scheme for cars and vans. It won't include HGVs. Government have said they will consult on this later this year. They have mentioned in their previous plan, the UK government are now consulting on the implementation of regulatory changes to support the take-up of alternatively fuelled vans. The first proposal will be to increase the weight limit of alternatively fuelled vans that can be driven on a Category B driving licence in the UK. And the second is exempting certain alternatively fuelled vans from goods vehicle operator licensing requirements in Great Britain. The consultation on this will close on the 18th of October, and FTA will be producing a briefing note on the consultation. So the next one is diesel tax review. Ahead of the autumn budget, the UK government are considering making changes to the diesel taxation to take effect from next April. We're expecting stakeholder dialogue on this any time from now, with an announcement in the autumn budget. HGV road user levy review. They are considering making changes to the HGV road user levy so that it incentivises improved environmental performance, including air quality and carbon emissions. We're expecting consultation any time now, with a decision within the next year. And lastly, government are also planning to consult next year on the non-transport sources of emissions, and we're waiting on further clarification as to how the clean air strategy will further develop.
So then, trying to pull some of this together, looking particularly again at the chargeable clean air zone or low emission zone side of things, what's the next steps and what do we expect to get? As we mentioned, there's the actual specific proposals on the first Scottish LEZ should be coming out this month. Equally, FTA has briefing sessions with DEFRA and DFT to talk about clean air and exactly what this all means, so that may refine and improve our understanding. It may give us a greater degree of certainty, as obviously what we're presenting today is a very much a first take and our analysis of what this should mean on the road. Also, as of now, the local authorities that are named are mandated to start examining their response to this, so we'll be engaging with them individually to understand how they're thinking and their analysis of what's required in their cities, as each may come to a slightly different conclusion, may go in a different direction. We've then got the Scottish framework coming out, and then it's by the end of March, as noted, for the first public details of what the English cities are planning to do. And then we have Wales next year, and then by the end of next year, the full and final confirmation of this second phase of English clean air zones, leading us into April in 2019, when the first clean air zones will actually start. However, there is a big caveat to all of that. Successively through this entire process has been driven by the activist law firm Client Earth. They have successfully taken the government to court several times. Indeed, the previous government plan that only included the 5 cities plus London was thrown out only because of a legal challenge by Client Earth. Client Earth have therefore pushed this through. They also challenged the legality of the draft plan that came out in the spring, and they did lose on that one, but only on the grounds that it was possible that the final plan would be compliant with the government's legal requirements. They have already announced that they see the final plan as completely insufficient and slow, and a plan for more plans. It is therefore almost a certainty that Client Earth will take the government back to court and will attempt to get this plan that we've detailed today thrown out and a new plan put in place. Now, for this, we would, to understand at this point, what will happen next if they win is a virtually impossible process. This is almost unprecedented policy making, where the court is actually ruling what is effective or ineffective. So it is very unclear to us what will happen if they win. The court case could happen anytime in the next couple of months, so certainly before and by the autumn, we would hope to have a much clearer degree of certainty about has that failed, in which case the current plan will go forward, or has it succeeded? Because whilst we're then very unclear about the policy process and exactly how that works, we can estimate the outcome of it on the road, which would be that there would need to be more clean air zones happening quicker and with more vehicles included. So the kind of areas we've seen on the list, you could see far more targeting vans as well as HGVs, and you could see start dates in advance of 2020. So that could push things forward quite dramatically. So finally, to summarise, to try and draw together in one slide what, based on the current plan, what we estimate it'll do to try and draw together in one place. And this is probably the most important slide for you in terms of implications on the road. We've itemised here where we think restrictions will come into effect. So we have 16 locations around the UK, give or take. We've bundled a couple of Scottish cities there. But you can see there, so we have the first phase, all of which will be HGVs and vans, followed by 2 in the second phase, Sheffield and Middlesbrough, and then you have the further list of cities. A further point to make at this stage, of course, is that this is what cities are required to do. There is actually nothing to stop cities going further or doing more. There will be cities not on this list, such as Oxford, who are already wanting to introduce a form of clean air zone themselves, and will work it up anyway. And I think from this list, certainly those that are more political, such as Greater Manchester, might well decide that they want to incorporate vans as well as HGVs. They might even push as far as cars. And similarly, cities and authorities such as Liverpool, particularly where they have an elected mayor, may get pushed in that direction too. Again, that's something we're hoping to get further information on over the next few weeks and months of how people are going to react to this and what they're planning to do, especially where the urban mayors are now in place. But this is certainly the shape of the least we can expect and the appropriate timeframes. So things will keep moving on. So we will be sending out updates, obviously, as we receive further information, either nationally or individually. We'll be circulating those in e-news. We may have some more details, hopefully, on a lot of these items for the freight councils in the autumn. But similarly, we have organised for a slot at the Transport Manager conferences to incorporate these items, and hopefully, as I say, by the autumn, we should be at the next stage of detail and certainty about what is happening. We'll also, in that presentation, be able to address the overlap and conflict with the London Direct Vision Standard and who that's going to apply to and how, because that will be a particular complication for anyone wanting to operate in London. And worth saying, in Transport Manager, for those who are interested, the details are here on the screen. So if you're interested in booking your place on that for the autumn. I'll draw to a close there at one point. We do have one further question, which I'll just pull up. Just struggling with my IT. Will the tax on fuel be an increase? If so, any idea how much? We certainly think that when it was announced, when the government announced in the previous budget that they were examining the case for reforming diesel taxation, we took that as code for an increase in fuel duty. We think the result of the election has actually thrown that into doubt, because now the DUP in Northern Ireland are not well disposed to the concept of fuel duty increases. Operators in Northern Ireland obviously compete with those in the Republic who pay a lower level of duty. But it is also, from first sounding, something that a lot of Conservative MPs themselves are opposed to, and given the slenderness of the government's majority, it would be a controversial measure to undertake. However, we're under no illusions that we think it is or was the Treasury's intention to increase fuel duty. That would be by a matter of, it would be some pence, I think, if we were to speculate on the range. However, it's not just a question of fuel duty. They could also make changes to VED, and I think politically that may be more acceptable. There would be other areas where they can make changes too that are less relevant to us, so it could be company car taxation. But the other one for people to look to is also red diesel, for anyone who's using that in industrial applications or for the non-road mobile machinery, particularly where those are used in urban areas such as construction equipment. That may well be reviewed, and the right to use red diesel could be revoked, and you would therefore have to pay the full duty rate. So that's the best information on that. Obviously, that's something we're lobbying on very intensively, and we will again feed back to members as soon as we have any better understanding of what's likely to happen in this autumn's budget. So that is the latest as we have it. So at that point, I would like to draw the session towards a close. As discussed earlier, yes, we will be circulating the PowerPoint presentation to all involved. Please feel free to share that within your companies. Please don't share that beyond that, as it is a confidential document for FTA members. But please obviously feel free to share within your companies. But if you're aware of other FTA members who would be interested in receiving it, please just let us know on these contact details. If you have any further questions about any of the elements in here, you can see our details there on screen. Please feel free to get in touch anytime. And with that, I would say thank you very much for your attendance today, and we will speak to you again another time. Thank you very much. Bye.